All right. I think we are broadcasting. Welcome, everybody, Wednesday night to our class. And tonight we're going to be talking about the microbiome and how important that is for your health. I want to do a check-in. I see we have a bunch of people coming in. Hey, Grant. Hey, Kristen. Hey, Michael. Hey, Ryan. Hey, Loretta. We've got Ryan. I said Ryan. Vicky. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar tonight. And we'll get started in just a moment. Hi, Marcia. And there is a chat box, and I'll type in something here. And let me know where you are, where you live. Type that into the chat box, and we'll get started in just a moment. Okay. Let me know if the audio is okay. Ryan's from the greater Boston area. Vicky's in upstate New York. Loretta's Cape Cod. Marcia is in Arizona. Very nice. Audio is good. Great. All right. Well, let's get started. I know we have a bunch of people coming in to the class, but we'll get started nonetheless. And I want to make sure that we don't have any interruptions here. My dog is chewing on something in the background, hopefully not too loud. So I'm going to share my screen in just a moment, but tonight there's a bunch of things that I would like to get across in this class. I want to get across how important it is for you to have a healthy microbiome and to give you the information that you need to be able to make changes that are substantial enough to actually make an impact on your microbiome. I'm going to start out by talking about what the microbiome is, and then we're going to progress into how to improve it, whether there's testing involved, and of course we'll talk a little bit about in the beginning, what is the microbiome? Why is it important? So let's get started. Let me share my screen here. So you should be able to see my screen. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And if you're having any problems with seeing the screen, do let me know. Move a couple things around here on my desktop. And let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, great. I think you can see my dog in the background there. Okay, all right, so let's get started. I've entitled the class How to Eat for Your Microbiome, but we're going to, of course, be covering the beginning details about what it is. But I wanted to talk about this concept of trends in medicine. And trends in medicine really are this kind of concept that every generation or so, there is something that sort of takes hold of the imagination of doctors and scientists. So when the era of antibiotics came about, it was so profound because people weren't dying as much as they were before. And life expectancy was increased because of the advent of antibiotics. And during that time, we're used to antibiotics now, but during that time, that was seen as an incredible achievement that almost gave people this overconfidence that we have done something so remarkable, that we are more in control of human health than ever before in history. Now, at that time, chronic diseases and autoimmune diseases weren't really all that prevalent. So they really, in a sense, had a legitimate thing to say when it comes to making this really huge progress in terms of tackling human disease, because at the time, human disease was associated mostly with infection. People died of infections like crazy. You know, if you ever read books or biographies I happen to have an interest in Abraham Lincoln, and if you read about people's lives, you know, just in the late 1800s, and you realize that people were just dying left and right of infectious diseases. People were dying young at all ages. People were losing people like crazy. It's something that it's hard for us to really conceive of when people are just sort of just dealing with so much death. Lately, there was an error of genetics where we sort of felt that once we sort of decoded the human genome, that we would solve everything. On top of that, people sort of felt that diseases were genetic, that somehow once we figured that out, we would really come to this remarkable place where human disease would finally be the end of it. We would cure everything. And the human genome was decoded, we determined what the human genome was, but very quickly we realized that the expression of the genes is really what is important. We didn't really understand that. It's remarkable that every significant advance in science that we have, we look back and we say to ourselves, how stupid could we be? Next came the era of inflammation, and we're sort of in that era of inflammation now where chronic diseases, which really are what are plaguing us most, are diseases of inflammation. And when we sort of begin to understand the sources of inflammation, and we're still really getting into understanding that from a scientific perspective, what really evolves and starts and leads to inflammation, that's really something that's ongoing and is going to continue to be ongoing. But now we are entering a new field of science that seems to impact everything else, and that's microbiome medicine. It is understanding the importance of the microbiome and how it seems that essentially it is involved with everything. I mean, by the end of this lecture, one of the things I want you to take out of this lecture is that we're just beginning to understand this. And it is just the insights that we have up to this point are so mind-boggling. And if you went back 20 years and said to someone that, well, do you think that your microbiome, the bacteria in your gut, can influence your neurochemistry in your brain, your neurotransmitter levels in your brain? People would probably look at you like you were insane. And yet now, and you'll see as we go through this lecture, we are getting to a point where people are seeing the microbiome interact with your body in almost every way possible. It's truly remarkable. And we'll get through and into that as the lecture goes on. I might add, by the way, and I see we have a bunch of people that came in, if you have any questions, just type them into the chat box. And many of you know, because I see many of you are on this lecture, on my class each week, I'm writing a book, and each one of these sessions is sort of a chapter in the book. And so any sort of comments, questions that you may have are going to be very valuable for me, because I'm going to get this transcribed and then edited, and that'll be sort of part of one of the chapters in the book. So comments, of course, there's no stupid questions. Just ask away if you have any questions. All right, so let's, I'm just checking to see, yeah, we have a bunch of other people that came in, great. Okay, so let's move to what is your microbiome. And your microbiome is literally trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses. Most people sort of associate it with just with bacteria, but a lot of us don't realize that it's actually a mixture of a whole host of things. And it's sort of like what we find in the soil. And there are people who have made sort of analogies between soil and your microbiome, because both are required in the soil. It's required for really healthy soil. And then for the human body, it's responsible for your health, as you're going to see. So there are more of them than you, trillions and trillions. We don't have trillions and trillions and trillions of cells. And up until this point, the studies, there haven't been that much studies about the fungi and the viruses that exist in our human microbiome in the gut. We also happen to have a microbiome everywhere. We have a skin microbiome, which has different bacteria in different parts of the body. There's promising treatments for acne, as an example, that have some regulation of the microbiome of the face. Even the breasts have a specific microbiome, different bacteria that are helpful and responsible for promoting breast health in women. And the total microbiome weighs 2 to 5 pounds. Isn't that remarkable? These trillions and trillions of cells and so many different species actually weigh 2 to 5 pounds. It's really remarkable. Okay, so why is your microbiome important? And this is really where we're going to get into it. So important background. Most people wouldn't start with these definitions, but I actually feel it's important for you to understand because it explains, in short, how to understand how the human microbiome is working. So all of you have probably heard of the term probiotic. A probiotic, people sell, the supplements are very, very popular now, and people take probiotic supplements. Well, probiotics are, of course, bacteria that you ingest to hopefully repopulate your gut. So most people know what that is. But prebiotics and postbiotics, people aren't all that familiar with. Now, a prebiotic is basically a type of, think of it as food for the bacteria. So it's prebiotic, bio means life. So it's before it gets to the bacteria. And it's basically the resistant starch and soluble plant fibers that we're going to talk about as we go through the class tonight. Now, probiotics, we know. Now, what are postbiotics? So postbiotics are really fascinating. Postbiotics are what are produced by the bacteria in your gut after they've been given the prebiotics. So think of this as the bacteria, think of this as the food, and then think of this as what happens after the food. It's like the end result of the food. And remarkably, the postbiotics have been proven to have enormous impacts on the body, such that it's turning out that, I'll give you an example. Pomegranates have a pigment in them that are responsible for incredible benefits to the body. People who take pomegranates, just like a shot glass of pomegranate juice per day, their carotid arteries open up significantly, more so than any medication that's out there. Just having a shot glass of pomegranate per day. It's a remarkable thing. And what we're finding that we think is that it's not the pigment itself that's causing this. It's actually the fact that the pigment in the red pigment, along with other chemicals in the pomegranate, are basically being processed by the bacteria, and then it's releasing another substance that is what's responsible for the health benefits. So that means that if you don't have a healthy gut microbiome and you don't have the right bacteria to process that pigment, you're not going to get the effect of this pomegranate or the effect of all of these polyphenols that we'll get into. All of the benefit that you have here, you're not going to get it unless you have a healthy microbiome. So this is one of many of the reasons why it's important for you to have a healthy microbiome, which of course is what we're going to be talking about. Now let's talk about what the microbiome does. And in babies, of course, it's there to help digest milk. We have when babies are breastfed, they immediately get bacteria. Well, they're exposed to bacteria through the birth canal, which has been shown to be beneficial, and then they're exposed to beneficial bacteria on the breast of their mothers, which has also been shown to be beneficial, not just in infancy, but the reason that breastfed infants and natural births have actually been shown to have much healthier kids in the long run in terms of certain inflammatory diseases, believe it or not. And one of the reasons is because their gut is populated by bacteria during birth and during being breastfed, et cetera. So a lot of the allergies and such and other conditions have been associated with the increase in C-sections and the decrease in breastfeeding, which is interesting. So anyway, when one of the first things that the bacteria in the gut do is help digest milk. one of the biggest, is produce something called butyrate. Now, butyrate is you could think of it as a postbiotic. It's basically produced after the fiber has been given to the bacteria, right? And then after the bacteria processes that, it leads to butyrate. And these are the things that butyrate does. It regulates your immune system. Most people focus on the fact that it promotes the maintenance of the epithelial barrier, which means that think of your intestines as your intestines are like your skin. Your skin acts as a barrier between you and the outside world. And when we eat, eating is sort of an intimate way of interacting with your environment. You're taking things from outside the environment and you're putting them inside your body. But ultimately, your gut is being exposed to the outside by the food that you're giving. Now, if you had a poor barrier to your skin would absorb too many chemicals. You would get inflammation in your skin from the outside environment. And the same thing goes in your gut. Your gut needs to have, there's really only a very thin layer of cells, really one cell basically, that is between you and your internal body in your gut. And between those, there is a space because food has to be absorbed through there. Now, when they say maintenance of the epithelial barrier, the butyrate is basically feeding the cells. It's like giving food to these epithelial cells. And it's making sure that these junctions are tight and not letting through anything that shouldn't get through. So we have a lot of doctors who speak of disease called leaky gut syndrome. And basically what they theorize that because there are lots of things that cause this interface to open up, that's causing a lot of problems in the health of people. So, so this maintenance of the epithelial barrier is really focused on a lot by science and doctors. And so you want to get this butyrate into your body by having fiber, which then creates the butyrate. It also promotes satiety, so it makes you feel full, may be protective against several diseases like colorectal cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, graft-versus-host disease, diabetes, and obesity. We'll get into obesity and the really remarkable studies in obesity as we go. It's very, very interesting. And we'll speak a little bit more about diabetes as well. As I mentioned earlier on, it can control your brain health because it can modulate the amount of neurotransmitters in your body. And really keep in mind that we've always known that there's this gut-brain connection. They call it sort of the second brain because there's so many nerves in your gut that it almost acts like its own brain. And there is a huge connection between the gut and the brain. Impacts your immune system. A large part of your immune system, the overwhelming part of your immune system actually is in the lymph nodes around your gut. So if your gut is being impaired or compromised by not having a healthy microbiome, which is basically saying it's not a healthy gut, the two sort of go hand in hand. If you can't have a healthy gut without having a healthy microbiome. You can't, so that connection with all these immune lymph nodes around your gut, that is heavily going to impact your overall immune system. Weight control studies, they've looked at twins that are, one twin is obese and the other twin is normal, and they can identify which one is obese just by looking at the gut bacteria. Which leads me to this topic of fecal transplants. They've actually done studies where they take the feces from the cecum of I'm not sure exactly what part of the colon they're actually taking the feces from, to be honest with you. But they're basically taking the feces from they've taken the feces from a thin person and put them into an obese person. And remarkably, you can have weight loss. And they've done it the other way. They've taken the gut microbiome from a obese person and put it in a thin person, and they've seen remarkable weight gain. So the microbiome is controlling it seems to be controlling everything. I'm not going to say that it is controlling everything, because just like I said when I was talking about these generations, these era of medicine, we're just one step, this science will be developed and it will be great and remarkable. And then after that, there'll be another realm of science. We're never going to get to the end of it. There's always going to be something for us to learn. So a lot of people are always about the latest, greatest, and that this is going to be what's going to solve all our problems. Well, there's no question that you need a healthy microbiome, but it's not going to be the end all be all of human health, but it is a big part. And it's a part that we pretty much ignored until very, very recently, which is really what makes it so exciting. And the fact is that as I was talking about these postbiotics, and I gave you the example of pomegranate, I mean, that's just one chemical. Like we haven't identified, any of the fungi and the viruses to a large extent. Who knows what chemicals they're producing? Also, think about it. If this chemical is produced by the bacteria, as an example, using the pomegranate example, I mean, how many thousands or tens of thousands of these compounds are being produced that we haven't even identified yet? These could lead to not just to new medications, but to a really revolutionary understanding of just new compounds that we just haven't gotten to yet. It's really remarkable. Let's talk about blood sugar. This is really, I think this is just really, really cool. So there's a computational biologist, basically a biologist who's looking at data and numbers and coming up with theories. And Aaron Siegel, who's from the Weizmann Institute in Israel, basically came up with a way of looking at your microbiome, like looking at the bacteria and being able to predict what your blood sugar is going to do to various foods. Now, we used to think that, well, if you're eating sugar, if you're eating ice cream, your blood sugar is going to go way up. And if you're eating, a sweet potato, it's not going to go up as much. What we didn't realize is that, well, on the whole, that is a very, very broad and somewhat unreliable generalization to say that if you eat ice cream, your blood sugar is going to skyrocket because of all the sugar. So what Dr. Siegel did was look at what happens between different foods and correlating them with your gut microbiome. So there are people who they eat ice cream and their blood sugar doesn't do anything. And there are people who eat sweet potatoes and their blood sugar goes through the roof. So his company, they formed a company and they're still doing research, but they've been able to you send away a stool sample, your stool sample. They look at the bacteria in your gut, and they then print out for you, based on the data of all the other microbiome bacterial analyses that have been done, to tell you which foods are going to make your blood sugar jump too much. Now, why is that important? It's important because anytime your blood sugar goes up, that is damaging to your body. Any blood sugar spike is damaging to your body because it causes your sugar to bind to protein. And this is part of one of the biggest things about aging is when sugar binds to protein because of a sugar spike, and this is measured by a test called hemoglobin A1C, which you may have heard of. That's the amount of binding of sugar to protein. Now, if you have too much of that, say in your muscles, as an example, your muscles are going to get stiff, you're going to lose flexibility. It's part of aging. When it happens in your eye, you get the diabetic damage of diabetic retinopathy. When it happens in your skin, it causes wrinkles because it changes the collagen from a stronger collagen to a weaker collagen because of the binding of the sugar to the collagen. So ultimately, one anti-aging strategy is to try to keep your blood sugar steady as you possibly can. And remarkably, you can do this on your own. I'm blanking on the name of the company, but his name is Aaron Siegel. And there's a company in the US that basically you send your stool sample away and it gives you a list of foods that most likely and pretty dependably are going to be going to give you an indication of which foods are going to cause blood sugar spikes. To me, that's really remarkable. And that's just one element. Obviously, if they can do that for blood sugar, there's going to be, as this science of the microbiome progresses, even more things that are going to be really, really impactful for your health. I think it is just so, so interesting. Okay, let's move on now to really what we want to get to, which is what can you do? Hopefully to this point, you realize how important it is for you to get your microbiome in order. Now, I hope I've convinced you of that, and we'll get into what you can do right now. All right, so obviously increasing your fiber intake. We'll get into the details of fiber intake as we go down the list, but there's soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, resistant starch. It's the soluble fiber and the resistant starch that are really going to act as food for the bacteria in your skin. Resistant starch is something that's found in high quantities in green banana flour, which you can now find as a supplement at stores. And you can also create resistant starch if you're a potato eater or a sweet potato eater. And what you do is you cook your potato and then you refrigerate it overnight. And when you do that, you form resistant starch. And if you heat it again and then you refrigerate it, you get a little bit more resistant starch. Now, it's not going to eliminate all the starch to a point where, you're not going to get any calories and it's not going to make your blood sugar rise. You get, a couple percentage points of resistant starch, but any amount of resistant starch that you can get into your diet is going to be helpful. So if you are a sweet potato eater, I recommend that you cook them and then you refrigerate them, and then you can still heat them and the resistant starch will be there still. But you might as well do that. It's easy to do. I often cook a sweet potato the night before, and that's one of my preferred starches that I eat on a fairly regular basis. And then I might have a little bite of it during the day as a snack after it's been refrigerated overnight. Now, where do you get fiber? Obviously, it comes from plant foods, and we'll talk about why it's so important for you to increase the diversity of these plants. But let's go into a couple details that I put together right before we got online. So artichokes, I spelled that wrong. Leeks, onions, garlic, they all have inulin, which is a prebiotic fiber. And we should all be eating some onions and garlic every single day to get that. As I said, increase the diversity of plants. Polyphenols, so polyphenols are really essentially the pigments, so you find them in berries, in dark leafy green vegetables. Fermenting your vegetables, of course, doing sauerkraut, and every culture ferments their food. And it seems like every class that we do every week, I'm mentioning something about fermenting your vegetables because it increases, obviously, it's alive, and it's really a miraculous process that's like waiting there for us to, there for us to take advantage of. What I mean by that is that a cabbage, when you buy it, it has lactic acid bacteria on it already, which makes it ready. It's like it's ready to be fermented. And when you ferment it, it becomes more digestible. It also forms B vitamins and enzymes that are all beneficial to your health. And of course, because it's alive, it's going to increase the micro diversity of your gut. And it seems like I always pull this out. But this book here, I highly recommend. It's called The Art of Fermentation by Sandra Katz. I think every household should have this book, and everyone should be doing some sort of home fermentation. It's so easy. You can go to my YouTube page, and on that page, you'll see how to make sauerkraut, but every culture has some sort of tradition of fermentation. And when every culture has something like that, there's got to be a reason. Obviously, it preserves the food, but ancestral wisdom and culture always included fermented foods, and there's a reason for that. We disregard those sorts of pearls of wisdom at our own peril, for sure. So everyone should be eating some fermented foods every day. Avoid artificial sweeteners. So sucralose, aspartame, saccharin all negatively impact not just the diversity of the bacteria, but also the activity of the microbes. So they are terrible for you. Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, stevia is okay. Monk fruit is okay. Erythritol is also okay, should be okay. But these artificial ones like sucralose and aspartame and saccharin all are going to be really bad for you. They're kind of like almost, avoiding antibiotics, that antibiotics are not going to be good for your gut microbiome because they're killing the bacteria, but these also do that as well. And so it's very, very important to avoid these as much as you can. They've been shown in some cases to increase obesity and increase blood sugar through what I hope now that you understand is a mechanism of action that's related to the fact that it's affecting the gut microbiome, which we are seeing now has an impact on your blood sugar, which is something people don't really realize. So you want to protect it. You don't drink Diet Coke if you. I know there are a lot of people who are like addicted to Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi, and they drink one every day. I can't stress enough that you should try to avoid that. And you can look at this as sort of a way of improving your overall health, just keeping in mind, okay, how's this going to affect my microbiome? Because you'll know at the end of this lecture how and what is going to affect your gut microbiome. And artificial sweeteners are going to do that. So if you can avoid them, it's best. Zevia makes if you need to have a Coke or a cola, they make a stevia one. Maybe it's not as good. I think it tastes really good. They have a root beer that I think is amazing. But ultimately, I think, and I've spoken about this in other weeks, the sweetness of these drinks is damaging to our palates, and we then become not accustomed to appreciating the natural sweetness of things like berries and fruits as well, just in general, because your palate is like a thermostat. So when you eat sweets, super, super sweet things like these things, your palate like detection is like set high, which means that when you eat something like a blueberry, it doesn't register the same burst of sweetness that if you weren't drinking that. It's really remarkable that once you get rid of all these artificial sweeteners, your palate actually wakes up and you're able to appreciate natural flavors so much more. And that's really amazing because it allows you to switch to foods that are natural and appreciate them and like them more than you did before. That's absolutely possible. And the same thing happens with salt. Some people can't have that much salt, and then they feel like their food just doesn't have any flavor anymore. But if you get rid of salt for a good 2 to 3 weeks, your palate wakes up and you start to taste the natural saltiness in certain foods. All right, well, we're getting off topic with that. Get outside. So your gut microbiome internally is affected by your outside environment, which really isn't a surprise. I mean, we touch things and, we touch our food. The outside is getting inside, and we have more microdiversity outside when you're playing out. We've all heard now that kids that are super sterilized as kids have more allergies, and it's probably important for kids to play in the dirt and get dirty because it is going to challenge the system. It's also going to, now we know, also increase the microdiversity of your gut microbiome, which is going to impact your immune system as well. Pet animals happen to have beneficial bacteria. It's been shown that people who have animals like dogs and cats, actually have better microbiomes because of the bacteria that they're exposed to by their pets. And the biggest lesson is the Hadza people of Tanzania. They have the best microbiome on Earth, at least the best that's been studied on Earth. They have they eat 600 species of plants and animals, and we eat fewer than 50. Now, I want to explain one thing which I don't think many of us realize. Species of plants, 600 species of plants. Now, keep in mind that when you are going to increase the diversity of plants in your diet from, probably most of us are getting much, much less than 50, you have to look at it in terms of families of plants. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the cruciferous vegetable family, while is one family. So that would just be one family. So broccoli, collards, kale, cauliflower, mustard greens, they're all basically in the same family, and they really have the same beneficial effects. But by having those, you're just restricted to one family of plants. You need to broaden that. So you need to look at it in terms of family of plants. So you have, lettuces, which can fall into different categories. And then you have, roots, and you have cruciferous vegetables. There's lots of different families. So when we think about expanding our plant diversity, we need to look beyond the families. Now, certainly, there's nothing wrong with having mustard greens one night and kale and broccoli. These are all very, very good for you. But I want you to think more in terms of So look up, Google different families of vegetables and know which ones are in the cruciferous vegetable family, and go sort of beyond that and see how much diversity you can get. I mean, we are blessed to be able to go into a store and have such variety available to us. A lot of times we don't try them. And when I say that, I always mention, whenever I talk to people, I always mention an Instant Pot, which is, those very popular pressure cookers. And this is really an easy way to get different types of vegetables into your diet, because you can make really rich vegetable stews, with beans, which have an enormous amount of fiber, and you throw in greens and onions and garlic and leeks, all these things that have the inulin, and you can have these remarkable, just diverse selection of things that's going to taste well, because it's sort of in one pot. So I highly recommend, if you don't have an Instant Pot, or at least get a slow cooker, that you can then create these Instant Pot or slow cooker stews that you can hide if you're not into green vegetables. Big can of tomato sauce, spice it up the way you like, throw in some beans, and then pick whatever leafy green you haven't tried and just throw it in there. And it's going to taste good almost always. I've never not had it taste good. So that's just sort of a tip. So the Hadza people are also free of all the chronic diseases that we have. They have incredibly low rates of disease, as you would expect from eating 600 species of plants and animals as well. Okay, so we're getting to the, if anyone has any questions, I don't see the chat box on my screen anymore for some reason, but here it is. Okay, so Day 2 Lab is the name of the company. I guess from Aaron Siegel, I'm assuming, is the lab. Thank you, Ryan, for that. I'm assuming that's what you were referencing. Sorry, I didn't see that in the chat. All right. So testing is available. Now, the testing is still in its infancy. So I have never done the testing. I mean, I know people are doing it, but I'm not sure the science is really all there yet. So I'm going to go through what they test, just because I find it interesting, but I don't know if it's sort of ready for prime time. But I might test just to see. But this is basically one of the labs. This is what they test. So they're able to determine, even now, remember, we're still in the beginning stages of this new field of medicine with thousands, I mean, tens of thousands of different species that have not been identified yet. But even now, they've been able to identify bacterial species that are associated with inflammation, constipation, diarrhea. They can test microbial diversity, B vitamins. The beneficial bacteria in your gut are very, very responsible for production of B vitamins in your gut. Short chain fatty acids, which is like the butyrate that we spoke about earlier on. Back up here, or out here. So, so they're able to detect that. They can detect pathogens, beneficial microbes, and they have different ratios of different bacterial species. A lot of people are focusing on Akkermansia, and they're starting to be able to determine ratios of certain ones that are going to point to certain impacts in your health. But as I said, it's sort of earlier on and really not certain when it's ready. But they have many companies, a lot of venture capital money that's going into these tests because they really see the future, which is that at some point, I truly believe, just like I believe that nutrigenomics, which is something that I do for some of my patients, looking at their genome to be able to determine what diet might be ideal for them, or to figure out what could be a problem if they don't. As an example, a lot of people have trouble converting beta carotene to vitamin A. So in those patients, it's good. You have to make sure they get a certain amount of vitamin A. There are people who have trouble converting the precursor of omega-3s to something called DHA, which is really needed for the brain. And for those people, they may need to take sort of a DHA supplement and not rely on plant-based sources. So nutrigenomics is far enough along, I believe, to be able to make recommendations. This, however, it does show, when you look at all these things, that they've been able to determine all of these things, that there are bacteria associated with inflammation and constipation and production of short chain fatty acids, then you really start to get an idea of how far the science is actually starting to become, which is really remarkable and is going to be something that you're going to be reading about a whole lot more. So that's what I wanted to cover tonight. Let's go over a little bit about the highlights here. Now, one of the reasons that I started to get into this is when I started Miracle Noodle, I started reading when I came back from Japan. Most of you know me because I'm the president of Miracle Noodle. And after I came back from my trip to Japan, when I saw the noodles, I was looking at the fiber that the noodles are made from, which is called glucomannan, which is a soluble fiber. And it's such a potent soluble fiber. It's such an incredible prebiotic fiber that I started reading the research just on glucomannan, which that in and of itself is incredible, really, really incredible, because it's associated with various effects, things like helping diabetes and heart disease and a whole host of other things that have been studied, which led me to reading a lot more about resistant starch and fiber in general. And I've been following this science sort of peripherally. But, as I've mentioned, the glucomannan is just a super potent prebiotic fiber. And we have people who put it in their smoothies. That's a really great use. Obviously, as I said, green banana flour is an incredible source of a prebiotic fiber for a smoothie. Getting resistant starch by refrigerating your potatoes is another way of doing it. But let's go through what we spoke about tonight. We're coming up at 45 minutes on the hour. So we've gone through that we're entering this era of microbiome medicine for sure. You're going to see this more and more as the science starts to come out. There are conferences about the microbiome that are being held and scientists that are getting funding to be able to promote this because it has such an impact on health. But it's never going to be the end all be all. It's just going to be another factor in managing human health and correcting something that we didn't even know really how in-depth it was for our health. We went through what the microbiome is, how big it is, in 2 to 5 pounds, and how really they're just studying that the bacteria, even though we have fungi and viruses as well. And there are more of them than you. So in you, it's really remarkable that it's almost like we have this. I mean, think about it. It's very unusual. We won't think of it as unusual in 10 years, but to think that we have all this bacteria that somehow is almost in control of us, residing in our gut and in our skin and in other places in our body that we've almost, for the majority of human history, have sort of poo-pooed and not spent all that much time on. To me, that's really, really remarkable. We went through a background. We spoke about post, pre, and probiotics so that you can understand that it's sort of a 3-step process. You have prebiotic fiber, which then is processed by the probiotic or the bacteria, and that yields postbiotics, which are just starting to be studied and that's going to be a whole other amazing thing. And we went through really what it does. But the point here is that this list is going to expand, and it's going to get to a point where there's going to be associations between just about every disease possible in some way. It doesn't mean that that's the cause, but it means that there is a potential interaction or almost a certain interaction. And it just goes to show that when it comes to human health and human disease, there are so many factors involved that anytime anyone wants to say that this is the way for you to get optimal health, there is no one way, and there are so many inputs that it's just, we are not machines in a sense. We are so much, there's so many things going on that we haven't even spoken about the effect of, of the mind on all of the parts of the body. We're going to get into that one night, one of our classes as well, but that's probably going to be another generation of medicine where we'll talk about how potent, how potent it is, the human mind is for controlling the human body. But suffice it to say, it's impacting, even now, it's impacting a whole host of things. It's really remarkable. And we went through how to improve your microbiome. So you want to increase your plant intake. Now, the point is that you probably already knew that you had to improve and increase the number of plants that you eat. There's no way around it. The studies are very, very clear that increased vegetable intake is going to be associated with increased health. Now you have to know how to select the right vegetables, the right plants. Certain plants can make you sick, and we've spoken about that in other classes, about how to choose, how to cook. We talked about, that was actually 2 weeks ago, we spoke about how to choose and cook and prepare foods so that they're digestible. Foods don't want to be eaten. That was sort of the point of the lecture, and they have defense mechanisms. And ancient cultures, traditional cultures have come up with ways to make these foods digestible. So if you have a difficulty in processing certain vegetables and have sort of given up on vegetables, it just means you haven't learned enough to figure out which vegetables are good for you. And for vegetables that you feel like you can't tolerate, you need to potentially learn how they were traditionally prepared. So whether fermented or soaked or sprouted, whatever the case may be. Now, it could be that you're allergic or there are certain vegetables that you're not going to be able to eat. But until you've actually investigated whether they have been prepared properly, you can't really make that decision. And ultimately speaking, as I just said, you really need to improve and continually optimize getting a broad diversity of plant families. And that's going to be very, very important. And get outside. Fortunately, a lot of us are caught inside now with what's happening. But the Hadza people are always given as the example of this, that they eat such a variety of plants, and they are very, very healthy. So we went through testing. So that is really what I wanted to cover. If you have any questions, do let me know. I see a bunch of other people came on. Kristen and Michael and Priscilla, Sheila, and Linda. Nice to see you, Linda. Darlene, a bunch of other people. So thank you everyone for coming on. Again, if you have any questions, do let me know. I hope this gives, a lot of times, I would say sometimes just having the knowledge gives you the inspiration to add new plants, new diversity of plants to your diet. Like sometimes just having the knowledge that you have this gut microbiome, it's not, a lot of us, it's not in our consciousness that we have this living mass of, it's almost like a rainforest that's changing and moving around, and we don't really think about it, that we have this like living mass of like microbes in us that's affecting our health in so many ways. And it's really remarkable that just changing your diet, you apparently can see changes in the microbiome diversity in just 2 or 3 days after changing your diet. So it's really amazing that you can improve this, in some way, very, very, very quickly. And there's certain cultures that evolve to be able to digest certain foods. Someone was telling me recently that the Japanese, because they were eating seaweed, developed a specific bacteria that dissolves or that allows you to digest seaweed. And some of us don't really have that. But the point is that amazingly, sometimes when you continue to eat a certain food, your microbiome evolves such that you're then able to digest it. So again, we're just getting started in understanding what's going on in this mass of bacteria that we have in us. And I hope I've expressed some of the excitement that I have about this science. And I hope it gives you the inspiration to one, just start being conscious of the fact that you've got this partner of stuff in you that it wants to cooperate and give you optimal health. And we know what the inputs and the food that thing needs. And we went through that, which means that speaking about what we spoke about tonight, in terms of what the class was called, is how to eat for your microbiome. Now, there are lots of ways of eating healthy and consciously thinking about how you're going to eat. And one of them is how to eat for your microbiome. Of course, you could say, I want to eat for my cardiovascular health and I want to eat for my diabetes. Well, the point is that when you eat for your microbiome, truly, it almost is one way of just consciously saying, when you look at your food, is how is this going to impact my gut microbiome? And remarkably, you're going to see improvements in your health just thinking in that fashion. So that's sort of what I wanted to get across tonight. I will thank everyone for your attention. I do appreciate all of you spending an hour with me. Everyone stayed on, which is really, really great. Not too many comments, but that's okay. The fact that you spent the whole hour with me, I appreciate the time that you spent with me. I truly enjoy doing these. It's really, truly one of the highlights of my week to be able to do this. And I appreciate all the emails that I get and the thank yous that I get as well. And we'll be doing these every week. There's no shortage of topics out there for us to cover, especially when what I think of as teaching is to give these big categories and then just slowly hone in. And so when you have this big category of, okay, how do I think about X? this is one way to think about health in general, is to start to be conscious of your microbiome. And that's sort of the biggest message I can give. So again, thank you all for your attention. I'm going to pause this and let's see here. Let me close here. Okay. All right. And just closing some of the screens here. All right, well, thank you again, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting now, and I look forward to talking to you. I believe next week is the next lecture. Loretta, thank you for your comments. And as I said, I'm going to be doing these probably three to four times a month, usually on Wednesdays. And if you'll get the newsletter and you'll be alerted to that as well. So again, I appreciate everyone, Sheila, Ryan, Priscilla, Miss Vicky, Mary, Marcia, Loretta, Linda, Lewis, Kristen, Grant, Joe, and what can I say? Appreciate your time.